If you've been following the NBA for any amount of time, you know that this week is going to be crazy. No matter what the circumstances are, no matter the context, free agency week right after the draft is always incredibly unpredictable and really, really fun. And so in this video, we're going to be doing a full preview of teams that have cap space, players to keep an eye on, and maybe some predictions thrown in there as well. So first up, I want to kind of set the stage here with some teams to keep an eye on in free agency, because in contrast to some of these other summers that we've had, I think it's a little bit less clear which teams are going to be able to make big moves in free agency. I put this on screen here just to kind of give you an idea. I think this is before the draft, so if you account for some rookie contracts in here, but even if you're a team that is in the $10 to $20 million salary cap range, you are one move away from creating max salary cap space, and that's really the goal of every team that wants to be a significant player in free agency. We're going to talk about the Knicks plenty. They're not on this list on screen. They're one Evan Fournier trade away from having max cap space to go after whoever they'd like to, so they would be included on this list as well. But these are the teams, specifically Detroit at the top, Orlando, Indiana, San Antonio. These are teams to really keep an eye on with these unrestricted and restricted free agents. And I actually want to begin here with Jalen Brunson as our first unrestricted free agent to talk about, because he to me feels like a domino effect of this entire offseason, because it feels like reportedly he wants to get paid. And I fully respect that. I mean, this guy comes to the league as a second round pick. This might be his one opportunity to make $20+ million a year. That's not something that you can just ignore, right? And clearly New York wants to make some moves. They want to continue to try and free up salary cap space to sign Jalen Brunson to a big time number. I think that's ultimately what New York wants to happen and what Brunson wants to have happen. And the only thing that would prevent that is if Dallas comes over the top with some big number that's even bigger than what New York could offer, because they are the incumbent team and we're looking at like $25 million a year for Brunson. And it's interesting because if New York doesn't get him, they're going to get somebody. Now, if you're Dallas, this isn't a guy that you can afford to lose given the situation around this team. You make the conference finals, you're an up-and-coming team, you've got Luka. You don't have the ability to replace Jalen Brunson via salary cap space or in any other scenario, even if you overpay him slightly. Like I think 20 a year for Jalen Brunson is a lot. I think he could be worth it, but for me, that's a lot of money. But if you're Dallas, I still think it is a worthwhile investment to still have the asset on your team, because you don't have the ability to replace that. I would be concerned if I was the Knicks or the Mavs about the size of Brunson, about some of the defensive stuff at times, just because when you're a smaller guy, you get picked on. And as much as I like him as an offensive player, some of the off-ball shooting stuff isn't fantastic in terms of catch and shoot, and he's never going to be like one of the best perimeter playmakers in the entire league. And so ultimately, when I'm looking at paying a guy $20+ million a year, I get a little bit concerned about his ceiling there, but Jalen Brunson's a great player, and I think he's going to end up either in New York or Dallas. Given the moves that New York has made, my best guess right now, my prediction would be that he is going to end up in New York. And we have to continue on down the list of the big name guards that are available as free agents this offseason. And next up is James Harden. This one feels the easiest and the simplest in terms of the destination. James Harden is going to be a Philadelphia 76er next season. They have invested too much at this point in bringing him in. Daryl Morey is too connected to him. It's a situation you have to bring him back. Like, you don't have another option. And really the question at this point is, what kind of deal is he going to sign? Obviously, Philadelphia would like for him to opt in and sign him to a 2-year deal, or have him opt out and have him sign a 3-year deal or something similar to that. If he gets the full 5-year max, I will be absolutely floored. But given, again, it's similar to the Kyrie thing. Like, there's just not a lot of other options out there for Harden to leverage against Philadelphia to get this full max. And so I do think he's going to come back, but I think it's going to be on a shorter max. We'll go a little bit quicker here through Harden and then this next player as well, because I think it's pretty cut and dry. Zach LaVine is next. I think there's still like a 10% possibility that something crazy happens here with LaVine, just because there's always one big surprise at least every offseason, every free agency period. And things have been pretty quiet on the LaVine front, with the exception of a couple reports saying basically that he is going to resign. I would expect, I've said this in a previous video, with Harden, with LaVine, and then with Beal, who we're going to talk about in a second, if they get the number they want from their current team, they're going to stay. In this case, for LaVine, if he gets the full max, I think he's going to stay. For Harden, if he gets the full max, but on a 2 or 3 year deal, I think he's going to stay. And then we'll talk about Beal in a second. So prediction wise, I think LaVine is going to stay, with the possibility of some crazy move out there, whether it be Portland, whether it be Indiana, coming out of nowhere and saying, no, we'll give you the full max that we can give you. We actually want you here. And maybe they've hurt LaVine's feelings a little bit by pushing this negotiation out for a full max for so long, but I think he's going to stay. Bradley Beal is up next, which is a little bit of a weird situation because he is technically a free agent, assuming he opts out of his contract, but more so for him, it would be a possible trade situation. So really it's about his destination and the situation around Bradley Beal. Similar to Harden and LaVine, mean if Washington says, here's the $230+ million max, Bradley Beal's taking that offer. Whether he's a Washington Wizard 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18, 24 months from now, I don't know. But if they offer him the 230+ max, he is going to sign it. That's just the way that the situation has developed. It's the way that he has approached his free agency and his trade request situation in Washington the entirety of the time that it has been a thing. He is going to get his money. And I don't care about, like, that's totally fine. More respect to you. I think if I was in his situation, I would feel pretty similarly if someone offered me a $230 million contract. I'd have a hard time turning that down. And he has the opportunity, like every single other player in the league has over the last 5-6 years as things have changed and adjusted throughout the league in terms of player movement. He has the opportunity to sign that contract and a year or two from now, cash in on his trade request and go somewhere else in his age 30 or 31 season. I think that is absolutely 100% the most realistic outcome, unless this turns into a Kemba Walker situation where Washington is not willing to give him that full max. And in that scenario, he could look to explore a sign and trade possibility or maybe go to one of these free agency destinations. And if you're Washington, by the way, I would recommend trying to make that sign and trade happen now rather than later, but that's just me. And then we move into some of the restricted free agency stuff. And this is where things get really, really interesting and really weird. So, of course, we have to begin with this section with DeAndre Ayton. And this has been a very fluid situation from basically the end of Phoenix's season until now, where it seemed relatively clear that they wanted to bring him back, just not on the max. It didn't seem like there were a ton of other teams that were out there that were going to give him this full max. And then Detroit makes the Jeremy Grant trade. Myself, as well as a lot of other people, theorized that that was so they could create cap space to sign DeAndre Ayton to a big number. And ultimately, I don't think Phoenix wants to pay a full max to Ayton, and they would have allowed him to leave in that scenario. But now that Detroit has added Jalen Duren to the draft, a big that they really like, they already have Isaiah Stewart as well, then going on and investing in DeAndre Ayton $30+ million a year at a position that teams typically don't invest multiple first round picks and $30+ million in at the 5 spot, I think Detroit has become much, much less likely over the last couple of days here to sign DeAndre Ayton. However, I at this point would be surprised if Phoenix retained DeAndre Ayton, or in addition to, I guess, keeping the entirety of the roster together. I think they're going to make a choice. They're going to choose to trade either Mikal Bridges or Cam Johnson to create a little bit more money flexibility here to re-sign DeAndre Ayton, or they're going to let him go, or they're going to sign and trade him. But I don't think there's a scenario in which Phoenix goes into next season with Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton all on the roster going into next year, given the ownership situation, given the fact that they just don't want to spend the money on it. I would be surprised. A team to keep an eye on here that I feel like there's been some buzz about lately is San Antonio. If there's a team in the league that's going to spend $30+ million on a big, San Antonio is that team. I think that Ayton wants his number. He wants his max. He said it basically from the moment he got in the league that his goal was to sign his second contract. And again, I have no issue with that whatsoever. Go ahead and sign your big contract. And I think given the fact that that's his priority and Phoenix doesn't seem to want to pay him, I think he's going to end up somewhere else. I don't know if it's going to be San Antonio. I don't know if it's going to be Detroit. I don't know if it's going to be Atlanta or Charlotte. There's enough teams out there that want DeAndre Ayton more than Phoenix wants to pay him that I think he is going to end up somewhere else. If you made me choose right now, I guess I would say San Antonio, but more than anything else, my prediction would be not Phoenix. Now, speaking of Detroit, as we talked about a good amount in that last section, they opened up salary cap space for somebody. They traded Jeremy Grant. Yes, they got a future first that they used on draft night. They get Jalen Duren, but there's still very clearly a plan for this salary cap space if you're Detroit. When you're in a situation like they are in with a couple of young guys on the roster, but even with the additions you've made, you're still not going to be great next year. You don't just go the offseason without spending your $50+ million in salary cap space. It's what they did when they signed Jeremy Grant a couple years ago, and that ended up working out great for them in terms of trading him away for assets. I think Miles Bridges might be their guy here. Like when they created this space, they might have thought, hey, we're going to go into the draft. We like Jalen Duren. If we get him, and we're going to transition our plan from trying to sign DeAndre Ayton as a restricted free agent to trying to sign Miles Bridges. Now, Bridges is a fine player. He can score, he can shoot. There's plenty of things to like there. I just don't love the defensive stuff from him. He has shorter arms, like he doesn't have a great wingspan, and he's just always going to be limited defensively as a result of that. I would be hesitant to pay him more than 20 a year. I think Detroit could come over the top with a 25+ a year offer to really try and get him away from Charlotte. Because I think Charlotte wants to keep him. They just, again, similar to Phoenix, they don't want to pay him and Hayward and Rozier, and the LaMelo extension coming up. They would create space, I think, to retain Bridges. But if they're unable to do so, I think Detroit is a very interesting option for Miles Bridges. I think he's an interesting player overall as a restricted free agent. And again, given the moves that Detroit has made, they have to have had some kind of plan, some kind of earmark for this salary cap space. And that guy might be Miles Bridges. If I had to make a prediction right now, I would say that Bridges is probably going to end up a Piston. Then there are two other restricted free agents I want to mention here at the very end. Colin Sexton is one of them. This is a guy that was a highly touted draft pick, someone that had a really good scoring season a year ago and just played 11 games this year, unfortunately for him, and his value has decreased significantly as a result of that. In addition to the fact that Cleveland now has Darius Garland and a ton of bigs, and they really have an identity outside of what Colin Sexton provides for them. I really don't know what to expect for him because of the injury situation, because there hasn't been much news or buzz around him at all. I would imagine, again, strictly from an asset standpoint, Cleveland would like to retain him as long as the deal isn't monstrously expensive, and I can't imagine it would be coming off of the injury. Like, my guess is Cleveland is going to keep him on maybe like a big 1-year deal, you know, like maybe Sexton wants to come back to the Cavs on a $20 million deal for 1 season. He gets some money with the opportunity to cash in next year if he works well alongside Garland, or he's just an easier guy to trade at the deadline. My guess is he'll stay in Cleveland because I don't think there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to prioritize him with their cap space, with the few teams that do have cap space this offseason. And it'll be some kind of relatively shorter deal in the 15 a year range would be my best, like, complete shot in the dark guess. And then last up is Anthony Simons, and he's just someone that I want to mention because he's a really, really talented player, and he came on so strong at the end of the year. And him and Dame together and the rest of this roster they're putting together in Portland could be really, really interesting. And I think he's going to stay in Portland, but I'm just really interested to see how much he gets on his deal, how much he's valued by Portland, what number he ends up getting, or if there's another team that could potentially come in with a big time offer. That's another guy to keep an eye on. But here's what I would leave you with, and I try and say this every single year. This might not seem like the most interesting, the most crazy, the most exciting free agency period we've ever had. I don't think we're ever going to have anything like 2019. We've got Kyrie and KD and Paul George and Kawhi and Russ and all these, and Chris Paul and all these different guys. Something always happens. It never fails. Something that we did not expect, a trade request from a player we didn't expect, a trade of Donovan Mitchell or this guy or that guy. All that stuff is 1,000% in play. And I say this to say, one, keep an eye out for the content. It's going to be a fun week. But two, expect the unexpected. That's what the NBA has prepared us for years now. And that's just the mindset I would go into this week with. But it's going to be fun.